Hi, everyone. Welcome to your time of midweek devotion. We're going to start with just some grounding exercise. I invite you, if you're able, to put both feet on the floor. My squeaky office chair. And you'll see this image on the screen. This is something to guide our breathing. And when the circle expands the next time, inhale. And then exhale as the circle constricts. And we'll just do that for a few minutes. You want to make sure you're taking a really good deep breath. A few more deep breaths. Okay. Hopefully, you feel a little more centered and more grounded in God's presence by connecting to our breath. So, our theme for this midweek is about Jesus and his surrounding community that he had, particularly when he was younger and when his faith was like that of a child. Um, but as we see in our scriptures, Jesus' faith was very advanced for his age. But he still was a regular kid. He had a community, he had a family, he had people who were like second parents to him. And he had a temple that he went to. And so we're just going to be reflecting in those scriptures today, just thinking about how Jesus's community shaped him and how ours shaped us. So here's our scripture reading for today. This is from Luke 2, and a lot happens in Luke 2. This is near the end of that chapter. Every year during Jesus' childhood, his parents traveled to Jerusalem for the Passover celebration. When Jesus was 12, he made the journey with them. They spent several days there, participating in the whole celebration. When his parents left for home, Jesus stayed in Jerusalem, but Joseph and Mary were not aware. They assumed Jesus was elsewhere in the caravan that was traveling together. After they had already traveled a full day's journey toward home, they began searching for him among their friends and relatives. When no one had seen the boy, Mary and Joseph rushed back to Jerusalem and searched for him. There you see an image of Jesus in the temple. It's from like the 1800s. And I always try to find images where Jesus is not so white-skinned because that's not accurate. But it was tremendously hard to find a accurate brown-skinned Jesus as a child at this age, at age 12. But I just love how intently they're listening to him. And he has such a commanding presence already as a 12-year-old. And everyone, all those men, they are leaning in and listening to him closely. And I just love that kind of intimacy in the painting. Our scripture continues. After 3 days of separation, they finally found him, sitting among a group of religious teachers in the temple, asking them questions, listening to their answers. Everyone was surprised and impressed that a 12-year-old boy could have such deep understanding and could answer questions with such wisdom. His parents, of course, had a different reaction. Mary said, "Son, why have you treated us this way? Listen, your father and I have been sick with worry for the last 3 days, wondering where you were, looking everywhere for you." Jesus responded, "Why did you need to look for me? Didn't you know that I must be working for my Father?" Neither Mary nor Joseph really understood what he meant by this. Jesus went back to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. His mother continued to store these memories like treasures in her heart. And Jesus kept on growing in wisdom, in physical stature, in favor with God, and in favor with others. So one thing that I love about this scripture passage is it is, Jesus speaking as the divine being that he is, but it's also a little bit of like tween, um, attitude almost, like just this total unawareness of how worried his parents have been. Um, and he seems so at home in the temple and doesn't even like consider that his family may be looking for them and that they've already left. And, has he wondered, how am I going to get back home? It's like such a long journey. Um, but it's incredible, like that he was missing. So they got to Jerusalem, they got back to Jerusalem once they realized he was missing. He was missing for 3 days. They were looking for 3 days, which is crazy to me. If I was looking for my daughter for 3 days, I mean, that's a missing child report. And this whole time he's been with this community in the temple. Um, and with this community of elders who seem to know enough, to be wise enough to shut their own mouths and listen to this child. Not all adults are smart enough to listen to children and have the patience to take them seriously and to know that their thoughts are completely valid as they are. But I just love how the community comes together for Jesus in this moment. And that they are probably watching him, making sure that he's okay during these 3 days. And they might have been wondering, when are his parents going to show up? And that Jesus had a community much, much bigger than just his parents. So big that, in fact, his parents thought he was with his wider community when they started to head back to Nazareth. And I just love learning about this wider community that Jesus had as a child. So you are so welcome for the photos you're about to see. But in thinking about Jesus and his community and how they blessed his life, many of us have a story of being in a church community that has blessed us. And some of us, those were, when we were children, but not always. Unfortunately, a lot of people have experiences with churches as children that were not pleasant. I was really lucky that mine was. But all that to say that you can have like a community experience with a church, one that surrounds you over a number of years at any point in your life. And I am very sorry if your experience as a child was not as positive as Jesus's was. at least of what we know of his childhood. But mine was a wonderful experience of growing in a church community, being surrounded by it, and how it impacted my life, versus being without a church, being without a community of any kind. I can't imagine my life without the local church, and this is one of those reasons. But my home church is University Baptist of Baltimore, Maryland. Many of you consider Calvary your home church and have your family here, and my family is still in Baltimore. But so University Baptist is where I was raised. I had Sunday school with my parents, which was a struggle. And then I went into youth group, and my mentor was my youth minister. And I grew up in this church, and it really was a formative place for me. It was a place that we came to every week. It was a place where I had friends outside of friends at school, and I didn't have that many at school, so I was grateful for that. There were a lot of adults that mentored me, who were friends with my parents. Um, and, adults that would, because we didn't have much of a children or youth program, adults that would volunteer to be with us on Wednesday nights during the adult Bible study. Um, and just the constant presence that this church was for me, no matter how I was showing up in that space, um, that it was a place where I could ask questions and grow in my faith. And I think that's something that the local church provides that is invaluable. So UBC ended up being a place where I was employed twice. And the first picture on the left you see is when I was on church staff as the communications secretary. And my mentor is the woman in the back with the brown hair. Um, and she really shaped me in my call to seminary. And you'll also see Miss Phyllis in the front. She was one of the church custodians, and she's no longer with us. She has gone on to glory, but she was so wonderfully supportive and affirming of me, and I miss her a lot. And this church was so supportive of me that I was ordained at a church in Georgia where I served, where I worked, and they were apparently jealous, is what they called it, that they wanted to ordain me at their church. And so I had kind of a blessing service with them, and there you can see my stole. And on the right is Sharon Smith, and she was pastor when I was a child and invited me to do offertory prayers and anything I wanted to do in worship. And just more of the people I mentioned, Miss Phyllis and Mr. Skip, he was also one of the custodians, and Anna, who was the on the left, and she and I worked together for many years, and she's just such a delight. Um, and it's no surprise to y'all that I made sure photos happened at this church, and so that's a group photo that we all took on Easter. But just all of these people supported me, and many of them aren't with us anymore, which makes me sad. But I just want you to think about, like, when you look at these pictures, thinking about your own church community, whether it's Calvary now or a church from your past that supported you. And what like delight that gives to our lives of having a church community, particularly those who are of the younger age and are in their formative years. Having a church community that cares about you, that asks how you're doing, that helps you learn about the Bible and theology, which is a massively complex thing to discuss. And just people that care about you, people who watch you be dedicated as a baby and watch you through Sunday school, people who are there just as much as you are, and they just provide a safe place. I think for Jesus, the temple was one of his safe places to be. I think that's why he was so distracted by it, and he didn't even kind of flippantly reminding his mother that he didn't even think about, where he should be. Like, this is where he wanted to be. So I just encourage you in this devotion time just to think about, what are those communities for you. A lot of times it's the local church, but it doesn't have to be. There are lots of community organizations that create these kind of safe spaces for people that are really critical to their well-being, their growth. Um, and just, we thank God together. I thank God with you for the collective blessing of community. And I thank God for the examples in scripture that we have of Jesus, who had his own community, whether that was at the temple with the elders or the caravan that they mentioned, his group of people from his hometown who cared for him like he was their own. And I did want to mention before I conclude that, in the photo on the left, the woman on the left is who I was named after, and she was the pastor's wife, wonderful woman, and her name is Alice. And so it's like literally a name connection for me. And the woman on the right is Miss Bev, who was tremendously wonderful and is no longer with us. We trust him. It's just part of living in community. You get to embrace the highs and the lows together. And so, thank you for joining me for this midweek devotion. I hope it brought you a time of pause, brought you a time of joy, of recollecting your communities, and just giving thanks to God for them, that we have them, that they are here, that they bless our lives. Thank you for joining me.